And, I guess the last thing I just skipped there is that the costs are not yet known, but they'll be determined in that design process for the corridor. So as we figure out what those are, with help from Transportation Commission and other input, we'll figure out then what costs be associated, what funds those costs can be managed from, and bring that back to the City Council.
Well, ask a couple of questions that concern folks in our city is pedestrians and biking. And the sidewalk issue that you talked about here earlier, which makes sense. I mean, you have to have sidewalks all the way through so people can walk easily, because after all, that's what sidewalks are used for, is for folks to walk on. And those bike sharrows for biking as well. So actually the widest part of that street goes from where Mountain View will be, if I get this correct, almost to Blaine. Is that correct?
44 feet, that's
44
correct.
feet, so that's where it'd be that portion would be very easy to put the sidewalks that we desire, as well as the bike paths. Is that correct?
Yeah, the bike paths would be within that, the bike lanes would be within that 44 feet, and then whatever parking, we could accommodate within the overall width. Outside of that 44 feet would be, of course, where the sidewalks are located, consistent with what's out there today in terms of their location.
And I also know you're going to be bringing this in front of Transportation Commission, so you're going to be walking through this, so we can be talking about all kinds of other ideas, how to achieve these things.
Correct.
That we need to. And one thing that struck my mind, you talked about that ordinance in 1974 about the 25 miles an hour everywhere, except from Van Buren to Hayes, and it's 30 miles an hour, and it's always been 30 miles an hour for 40-plus years. And it just struck me as, and that's speed, of course, is a concern, so maybe that's something the Transportation Commission should look at, making that 25 miles an hour all the way through that entire strip. And, of course, in front of the high school, when students and kids are around, that's 15 miles an hour at that time. Anyway, I'll throw some things out here, Catherine.
Yeah, I just had a question, and it kind of dovetails to what you were talking about. So as I was reading all this stuff, in the code, especially for speed limits, it says that the city engineer can make those changes, and I know you do all the, you put all the counters down and all that kind of stuff, and you all do that all over town all year, right?
We do traffic counts most of the year, obviously not in the winter months with the snowplows out there. They don't agree with each other.
And then when you're counting, what you're counting is, can you collect speed off
We
of
do
those,
have the
or
ability to
you
collect
can?
speed,
Okay.
through a couple different means, and we do counts throughout the community.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
Okay, I didn't know that. I had another question just really quick, because when I was on the bike path tour that we did, one of the members of the commission was asking me about widths of streets and the bike paths sharing with the sidewalks, and you had a picture actually of one of them up there on the slide. And then we started talking about the snow. So when you start having the snow, I know that you probably already thought about this, but what particular configurations we can generate, you'll present all that, because they're like, people are like, we could do this. I'm like, but I don't know if we can do this because of seasonal stuff.
When you start talking about bike lanes on the street, or even extra wide lanes with sharrows, where the bikes are tending to ride towards the curb line, that's always a consideration about, okay, how do we manage winter operations and gravel and snow accumulation, those types of things. Because of the desire to maintain those facilities open for bikes year-round, then the placement of sidewalks becomes very critical. Because if you put sidewalks right up against the back of the curb, you don't have a place to put the snow except in the bike lane. Versus if you put the sidewalks removed from the curb and there's a planter strip or tree lawn of some width, 5 to 10 feet, then that's where we prefer to store the snow, and that way we can clear the bike lanes. So yeah, it's one of those things that varies throughout the community, but the preference is to have the planter strips from the perspective of winter operations, to be able to store the snow in those planter strip areas.
One more question.
Okay.
Go ahead. Did you have a question?
No, go ahead.
No, the question had to do, when you were doing the stop signs, and you were talking about how, there's the stop signs, everything is the same except for Third and whatever the other one that the stop is.
Hayes and Blaine are the two
Hayes and
outliers.
Blaine. Do you know remember how that came to be, actually, so that it didn't turn into a four-way stop? I'm just out of curiosity, because
Yeah, that long before my time.
Long time, right.
They were here, and the folks that were here when I got here, As I recall in conversations, it was long before their time. So I think they've been that way quite a ways. I suspect at Hayes Street, it really had as much to do with anything that most people are turning north-south because you couldn't continue east. Right.
I got some other things I want to bring up, but I want to hear from some, Walter?
Les, how is White Avenue beyond Mountain View designated, and what's the curb-to-curb width on it?
White Avenue east of Mountain View, as I recall, is a minor arterial. And I believe it is 46 feet wide, if I remember correctly. It has 3 lanes, has a two-way left turn lane in the middle, plus bike lanes.
So it's wider. It's wider
either
than
46 or 48.
It's
but
wider than our 36-foot arterial standard.
Yes. Keeping in mind that when that street was constructed, that arterial standard was different.
Oh, okay.
This current standard was adopted in 2014. That project was built some years before that.
Okay, and one more if I may.
Okay.
You said that traffic calming is intended to slow cars down, not necessarily to reduce the quantity of traffic on a street.
That is, in my understanding, the general intent of traffic calming is to reduce speed. Kind of a side effect of that is some folks do not want to slow down and then will choose a different route.
Because the modeling shows the traffic calm
Moving people around.
estimates
Yes,
to be lower than the non-calm.
right.
Okay.
And that is, like I say, it's a side effect of what is generally considered the intent of traffic calming, which is to drop the speed. But as you drop the speed, some people choose to then take a different route because they don't want to drive in a more congested location.
Thank you, Mayor.
Okay. Well, go ahead, Jim. I'll let you.
I wanted to ask, when we get the bridge completed, since that'll be the first component of the project, will it be traffic studies based on the actual traffic at the outset of the bridge opening before we invest in the traffic calming so that we don't overdo that? Or are we going to try to guess what the traffic situation's going to be and then spend a bunch of money on something that maybe we don't need?
Well, that's a consideration I guess the council would need to make if there's any desire to potentially defer traffic calming. The recommendation in the transportation plan was to do them concurrently, and so that's currently the path that we're on. If there's a desire by the council to maybe step back and study the impacts of the bridge and then decide what to do, if anything, at that point, that's an option that the council could take.
Thank you.
And I got a question about D Street. I noticed in your presentation, the Fort Russell area, currently part of D Street is in the Fort Russell area. Is that correct?
I believe that is so. Run back
And the
to
way
that
I
real
looked
quick.
at that was it will be there even if the Fort Russell area gets reconfigured nationally. That's where it's at? That's
So
new. and
there's
that's-
where it is today.
So part of
and,
D Street is
D is right in there, so
Right
just
through there.
just grabs it.
Okay.
And then with the expansion, that north side didn't appear to have changed any, so it really only has just 1 or 2 lots to the north.
That caught my eye last, and another thing that caught my eye was, because we've heard a lot of people saying that 3rd Street butts up against Lean and Whitmore, when in fact it looked like 1st Street butts up against Lean and Whitmore in that map that you had with the star on it, that yellow.
As far as the traffic, or excuse
So
me,
it was
go the other way here. The school zones,
There was a school zone, because there was some
the other way.
concern of folks on that. I wanted to take a look at that. It's there somewhere. I seen you had a
yeah, it's
yellow.
in the assessment section. Then,
Right there.
There.
Right there. You see that star? That's where Lean and Whitmore is, correct?
yes,
And then-
there is a row of, one row of lots that front 3rd Street.
That's
right through here.
duplexes or
Yeah,
apartments.
duplexes and
Okay.
multifamilies through that area. So there is one row of buildings between the Lena Whitmore property and 3rd Street itself.
Okay, I just wanted to point that out. When does this move on to transportation?
We
look at
anticipate that the discussion of traffic calming will begin Probably at this month's meeting, which is 2 Thursdays from now. if I
See,
recall.
we have a date for that, Gary, so folks will know when it is, so they can be coming to it.
Look it up
And
right now.
Looking at the overall presentation, if I got this right, the Third Street Bridge conversation, I can remember this being 30 years ago, but it really took effect in 1994, according to your slide presentation here. So it's been a discussion for 23 years. And the multimodal plan started in October of 2011 and was adopted in October of 2014. And if I recall right, there was 4 different meetings, public meetings and open houses and that type of thing, so people with comments and concerns and talks happened at that time. Isn't that correct?
Yeah, a series of, in the planning process.
I wrote down open house of 2012, April of 2012, October 9th and 10th of 2012.
Yeah, they're on the screen, Mr. Mayor.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah, so
Okay.
that's as far as the open houses and the workshops, yeah, in April 25th, October 9, 10,
Okay.
and then April 1st of 14.
Okay, well,
Your Honor, looks like October 12th is the next Transportation Commission meeting.
what time is that meeting?
It's 4 o'clock
4
here
o'clock.
in the chambers.
4
which
o'clock
one?
in council chamber.
And which one of our counselors is the liaison? Catherine is? Okay, all right.
If I would note as well, in response to Councilmember Boland's comments about whether we would wait with moving forward with traffic calming alternatives until the bridge were completed, as Les indicated, traffic calming typically is to moderate the speed of traffic, not reduce volume. So the direction we've been taking is that they will be developed simultaneously, unless directed
Well, one
otherwise.
thing I was just thinking about this, and that's why I wrote it down, that 30-mile-an-hour speed limit from Van Buren to Hayes, and then we have the rest of it's 25. It seems to me logically to have the whole thing 25, because that becomes confusing for people that drive. I know myself, I usually have to set my cruise control, or I'm going about 70 everywhere I go. And, I'm just saying, thank God for cruise controls, because it saves me from getting tickets. But I think that's something that Transportation Commission should take a look at, Les.
But certainly, as part of the overall assessment, speed limits was one of those components.
Well, great presentation, Les. Thank you very much.